Hi, my name is Andy Hawker. I love things that go fast. I'm hoping that we can have some fun together. So join me as a fellow disciple of speed. Hello, fellow disciples of speed. I'm very excited today to share with you a couple of cars from my collection and a little bit more that are very special to me. One is the oldest car in my collection, and the other is the first car I ever got in my collection that kind of really started it all. But I want to give you a little history. The Novelty Iron and Brass Foundry was founded in 1872 in Freeport, Illinois. In 1875, they changed their name to the Novelty Iron Works, and they made cast iron products, pumps, windmills, that kind of stuff. In 1885, they became the Arcade Manufacturing Company. And what they began to do was make coffee mills and other small hardware items. But they also, in 1900, began to produce toys, and they had a full line of toys. But what happened in 1921 really kind of changed everything for the company. They came out with a cast iron car that was a yellow cab, and it was wildly successful. And they started making other cars and other products like that, toys like that specifically. This went on until 1941. And in 1941, as you know, we went to war, World War II, after Pearl Harbor was bombed. And like all manufacturing companies, everything started going towards to the war effort. And so they had to stop making toys, and they never made toys again. That was the end of it. 1941, they never made any more. But in 1928, they made a Model A Tudor sedan. The Ford Model A Tudor sedan was actually produced, the real one, in 1928. This car was also manufactured in 1928, so they came out with it right away. But it's kind of fun. You can see inside here, there's some markings in there. And on this side, it says Arcade for the company name. And then over here, it says Freeport, Illinois, which is where the factory was. And there's also a number in there. There's 114L and 114R. So there's two halves to this car. So it was cast. The two halves were put together, and then one long rivet went through the car and was swaged on this side to hold the car together. It had steel stamped wheels with a steel axle, and the axle was put through and swedged as well. So that was the car. So what's really kind of interesting about this car, this particular car, is that in 2021, I took my 83-year-old father, his name's Charles, to McLean, Texas. McLean is in the panhandle of Texas. It's just east of Amarillo, Texas, on old Route 66. And my aunt lives there. My father wanted to visit her, but also in McLean, Texas is her son, my cousin John, and his wife, Gayleen. In 2012, John and Gayleen were remodeling their house, and they were taking out a wall. And in that wall, when they opened it up, they found 6-8 inches of this very fine powdery sand. And they realized that sand was from the Dust Bowl. Now, also in the wall was this car. So when that house was being built, somewhere in the 30s, a child had this car, came out in 28, and somehow it got in the wall when they were building the wall, and all the dust came in and covered it up. And so this car, sometime in the early 1930s, stayed preserved in that wall until 2012. And when I was down there in 2021 with my dad, my cousin knew that I collected cars, and he gave it to me. And I love the fact that it has such an interesting history. So this is definitely the oldest car in my collection. It is from 1928. So next I'd like to show you the very first car that I ever got. And that's up here on this shelf. And this shelf back here is predominantly all Hot Wheels. And most of my red lines and black walls are up here, along with some Ultra Hots and Hot Ones and so forth. But this is the very first car that I ever got. It's the Hot Wheels TNT Bird from 1970. Now you can see that this car was very well played with and very well loved. My brother had this car, and it used to be this kind of spectra flame green, as you can see a little bit right there, and was also repainted somewhere along the line. Somebody gave this to my brother. Somebody painted over it, I think. My brother had it for a little while, and then he gave it to me. I don't know what year I first got it, but I was probably 6 or 7 maybe. But I love this car, and to me this just screamed hot rod. You know, it really developed my love for cars. One thing about this car is that if you the windows were susceptible to melting, and frankly, if you left it in the back seat of your parents' car in the back window on a hot day, this is proof that yes, they would melt. But this is the car that started it all, and again, I played with that car forever. I've got a lot of cars in my collection, but this one is probably still my favorite just because of what it means to me. A few weeks ago, I had a chance to pick up some beautiful red lines, and one that they had there was the TNT Bird. This is what this car used to look like. This car is in very good condition. You can see a little bit of paint chips on the striped tampo, and a little bit on the vinyl top, the flat paint on there. But the number 2 stickers are still there. It's just in great condition, and I just couldn't pass it up to have one that is much better condition. Of the two, if I had to pick one, if the house is on fire, I'd probably go with this one. As crazy as that sounds. The very first car. So as a kid, Hot Wheels was everything to me. But the more I learned about Hot Wheels, the more I just was even more fascinated. And to give you an idea of some of the history, you may know some of this, but I'm going to share it anyway. Elliot Handler met his wife, Ruth Moscow, in Denver in 1935. Ruth was from Denver. They were married in 1938, and they moved to California to live there permanently. Now, Elliot was an artist, and he made household goods that were just artful and beautiful. And Ruth was a very shrewd business person, and she was in charge of sales and marketing. And they had some modest success selling the things that Elliot made. Elliot and Ruth founded a new company in their garage with a man that they knew. His name was Harold Matson. Now, the company was called Mattel Creations. The name Mattel came from Matt and Elliot's first 2 letters, L, Mattel. That's where the name Mattel comes from. Later that same year, Mattel Toy Company was founded. In 1947, Matt had some very serious health issues, so he sold his share to the company back to the Handlers, and really that part of the shares Ruth took on. And she was again in charge of marketing. She was a very shrewd business person. Their first toy hit was called the Yucadoodle. It was a ukulele. They had many successful toys hit the market. Then in 1956, while on vacation in Switzerland, Ruth saw this really kind of a racy German doll called Bild Lily doll. But they called it kind of a sexy doll, and she didn't like that. She thought she could make a doll that was much more cleaned up, a cleaned up version, and a doll that could also be inspirational to young girls back home. So she came home and worked on it, and then in 1959 at the New York Toy Fair, they introduced Barbie, the Barbie doll. Barbie was named after their daughter, Barbara. Later, they introduced in 1961 the Ken doll. Ken was named after their son, Ken. So that's Barbie and Ken. At Christmas time, somewhere around 1965-66, Barbie and Ken were visiting their parents with their own kids. They had their own kids at this time. And Elliot was watching his grandkids on the floor, on the carpet, in the living room playing. And he noticed they were playing with these little die-cast cars. He stood there and he watched them and he thought, now this is interesting. These kids love these little cars. I have a toy company and I don't even have any little cars. So after Christmas, he went back to the factory, called a meeting, brought in his marketing people, his designers, all the people in charge, right? And explained this story to them. And he says, here's what we're going to do. Go out, research the toy car market, find out little cars, you know, who are the big players? How do we get in there? How do we become successful? So 2 weeks later, they all come back together, and the marketing people tell Elliot, look, Matchbox has the market. They own it. They own it. There's also Corgi and Dinky, but it's all Matchbox. And for us to get into that is going to cost a lot of money, and to recoup that cost, you know, it's going to be tough. We don't recommend doing it. And Elliot got up from his chair and he said, yeah, I'm sure you're right. I'm sure you're right. And he walked to the door and he stopped and he turned around and he looked at everybody in the room and he says, but let's do it anyway. And he walked out of the room. So they started designing, they started working on it, but they were really struggling. People were having a hard time coming up with a way to differentiate themselves. And so one day a designer came to Elliot and he says, I'm struggling. I'm not sure what your vision is. What do you see? And Elliot said, come with me. And they walked out into the employee parking lot. Now this is Southern California in the mid to late 60s. And really the height of the car customization world and hot rodding and all that was happening at that time. And in the employee parking lot was a car that caught Elliot's eye. It was a customized Chevy El Camino. And Elliot pointed at it and says, that's what I want. And the designer looked at it and said, oh, okay. And he went back to work. And in 1967, they had 16 cars designed and ready to hit the market. I never had one of them. I did not have any of the original 16. My childhood friend Troy, I grew up in his house as much as I grew up in my own house. We always played with our cars. We loved the cars. My childhood friend Troy had the custom Eldorado. And you know, I didn't really know that it was one of the original 16 at the time. I remember at Christmas giving Troy a Hot Wheels car, and he gave me a Hot Wheels car, and I know which ones those are. But in 1984, my friend Troy passed away. He died of heart failure. And I went to visit his mom, and I loved her. Her name was Wilma, and she was like another mom to me. And while visiting her, she brought out the box, the little wooden box. It was an old cigar humidor, in fact, and said, you should have the cars. So I have all of Troy's cars. And to this day, they're still on a shelf. In fact, I'm going to take the background off of the car dealership here so that you can see this shelf right here. These are all Troy's cars. So I had the Eldorado. In 2016, my friend Doug Morrill gave me his childhood collection, and it is amazing. You can see pictures of it on our website. And these cars are all throughout this collection here now. But significantly, Doug had the other 15 cars of the original 16, the Sweet 16. And I want to show those to you now. So here are the Sweet 16, the original 16. I want to start off with the custom Eldorado. This is the one that my friend Troy had growing up. And considering how much we played with our cars, and you saw my TNT Bird, this thing is still in incredibly beautiful condition. Has a little bit of scratch here on the roof and a little bit on the trunk, but other than that, just great. Still has all the chrome and the red line on the wheels. And when Mattel first put out the Hot Wheels, of course, the hood's open. You can see some beautiful detail in there. So that was the custom Eldorado. Here is the Diora, and it still has its original surfboards on it, also in just immaculate condition. Just absolutely beautiful. This is the custom El Camino, very similar, I should say, probably to the one that they saw in the parking lot that day. And again, just absolutely perfect. In fact, I asked Doug if he played with his cars, and he said, oh yeah, he did, but his mom made him put them away. And he had a carrying case. In fact, it's back here, and they all stayed in their compartment. This is the custom Mustang. Just a beautiful car, also with the opening hood. Just gorgeous. The custom Corvette, also in fantastic condition, with the opening hood and the white interior. And of course, this one was made in the USA. The original ones were made in the USA and immediately also in Hong Kong. This one is so cool. Hot Heap. Yeah, made after a little Ford. Just beautiful. This is the custom Camaro. Again, just gorgeous. I love all the Spectre Flame paint. This is the custom T-Bird. And this is the one that later inspired the TNT Bird, the same year of Thunderbird. Custom Cougar. Again, incredibly great condition. This one here is the Ford J car. Now the Ford J car was produced after the original GT40. Ford was coming up with their next iteration. This car did not handle very well. It was highly modified after that. Later became the GT40 Mark IV. The custom Firebird. I remember an old TV show called Mannix. He drove a car very similar to this, and I loved that car as a kid, obviously. Here's the custom Beetle with the sliding roof, sunroof. Gorgeous. This one here is called the Silhouette. And of course it was a hot rod designed in the day, and they made a beautiful version of that. This is the custom Cuda, Barracuda. Another beautiful car. What I like about this too is the hood. It's got the little detail there in the hood where it came down to the point. Just again, in incredible condition. This is the Beatnik Bandit. Another customized car, a real car from the 60s. And just gorgeous. Now this last one here is kind of interesting too. This is called a Python. Now this one was made in Hong Kong, but when this car first came out, it was called a Cheetah, and Mattel was found to be in violation of copyright on a car. There was a race car manufacturer in Southern California that made a car called a Cheetah. So they had to quickly rename the car to Python. But some of the Cheetahs got out there, and they are highly sought after, and they're very highly valuable. So it was a lot of fun for me today to get to share with you the oldest car in my collection, the 1928 Ford Tudor sedan, and my very first car, the TNT Bird by Hot Wheels, as well as the original 16, the Sweet 16 from Hot Wheels. So until next time, happy hunting.